Raju has a very interesting history, and by the way, he is communicating with us from India right this moment. So a testament to how well Zoom can work when it works well. Raju is a technologist with a strong communitarian ethic. He is something of an expert on sustainable landscaping, which as the weather warms up and some of you get into your gardens, you might be thinking about. He came to the United States from India and got his PhD in communication networks at the University of Wisconsin in Wisconsin. He's enjoyed a long career as a researcher, consultant, and technologist. He has founded 2 IT startups as well as a number of community groups aimed at organizing people for systemic change. He's currently active with Long Island Together, a progressive collection that organizes around education, immigration, and social change, as well as ReWild Long Island, which brings native plants to public spaces and private yards. Raju resides in Port Washington with someone I think that we know quite well, Sonia Arora, who is his wife, their son, Kabri Singh, who is a high school student, and their cat, Lucky, who does nothing except bring them joy and pleasure. Raju serves as the president of the board of ReWild Long Island, and it is with anticipation, Raju, that we welcome you to the Ethical Society.
I'm so glad to join you. I was told that I would be speaking for about 25 to 30 minutes, and then there is a Q&A or a discussion after that. Is that correct? Am I? Okay.
When you finish speaking, we'll have our closing words and so forth, and then the Q&A if you're willing to stick around, which we would appreciate.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, and I do, since it's not a very rehearsed speech, it might be longer or shorter, so we'll go with the flow and I'll make sure that I'm addressing it. And also, as always, let's keep it interactive. So if you have something to say, actually, I'll bring chat up. So I'm looking at chat as well. So if you have a question or if you have a comment, please throw that in, or if you want me to address something, throw that in and I'll do so, right? That's not a problem. I was told that the theme also of these talks is your journey or our journey. So definitely an element of including my personal journey as well as stories around what we are trying to do. My theme is sustainable landscaping. So what that is, right? Let me say that in a nutshell, in case, so that we get to the point quickly, right? So sustainable landscaping is really looking at the green spaces around us and realizing that not all green is environmentally sustainable. We face, as a species, as a world, we face 2 big crises now that impact the whole planet. One, as we all know, is climate change, and the second is biodiversity loss. Both of these are immense crises that, challenge our not just technological ingenuity, but also our moral and ethical limitations as a society and as individuals, and really require us to step up to the moment in terms of both moral, ethical, spiritual growth, and technological growth together. How do we ensure equity within our own communities? How do we ensure environmental justice? How do we ensure that other species that share this planet with us will survive? And how do we ensure that we survive if those species don't, right? So obviously, the survival of those species and of ecosystems is of immense importance to us. Sustainable landscaping says, hey, well, look, if you just say that all this restoration of Earth's ecosystems can only happen in preserves and what shall I say, in the national parks or whatever, then sadly, the amount of space we have dedicated and remains for many of those spaces is very limited. It's less than 20%, more than 80% of the land is privately owned. Suburbs are sprawling everywhere, exurbs, concrete and highways and things like that, not just right in the United States. I'm talking, as I said, I'm in Coimbatore now, which is a thriving, bustling city in India. Urbanization in India, still 50% of the people in India live on the land, live in farms and live in agrarian communities. Now, the prognosis is for all those people, the 50% of the people, that's 500 million and more people, to move into cities. So what is inevitably going to happen, right, whether it happens in the United States or in Nigeria or in India, is the spread of these cities and that sprawl eating up not just agricultural land, but also all the marginal forests and grasslands and things like that. And that environmental catastrophe that we are waiting to unleash, both in terms of climate change and biodiversity loss, we can combat that, and we need to combat that in spaces that human beings live. We can't just do it in the away spaces or in the wild spaces. We need to think about our backyards, our front yards, our schoolyards, our churchyards, our golf courses, our median strips. Think creatively, imaginatively, and say, okay, what are we doing in terms of landscaping? And sustainable landscaping comes to four things, right? So one is, and I'll talk more about this, you have to center around native plants. So in the song, right, you heard the line, tune my body to the music from the ground. Well, if you listen to the music from the ground, from your local ground, it sings the songs, right, of species that no longer exist, right, that are not around you. It sings of species that have been and evolved in that land for millions of years and co-evolved with insects, co-evolved with butterflies, bees, beetles, birds, etc., that depend on that set of native plants for their sustenance, for their habitat, right, and for their very existence. So instead, we have imported, right, whether it's a rose bush or a hydrangea or a lawn grass from Central Asia or whatever, right? We have or concrete. We have turned our spaces into inhospitable deserts for a broad range of native species. So we need to, again, quiet down and listen, tune your bodies, tune our bodies, and tune our lands to the music from the ground. And so the first principle is that of planting native, looking at your own native ecosystem, understanding the species that exist, and the food web that starts with that native plant goes into caterpillars, which feed birds. And so the protein chain that starts in your yard is so critical, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is we have to feed human beings as well, and we have to feed ourselves. And one of the best ways to feed ourselves is to grow our own food. And that's very, very consistent with growing native plants. You can definitely use a lot of native plants for food. The Native Americans managed without, whatever eggplants for millennia, but it's not all. You don't have to be all 100% native. You can grow your own food. The important thing is the food miles for a tomato that you grow in your own yard is far, far smaller, and your tomato is more nutritious. And if you grow native plants as companion plants, you'll get a lot of bumblebees to pollinate it. So really, really synergistic with growing native plants in your yard is growing your own food. If you're a gardener or whether you grow fruits or vegetables, right? That is perfectly in tune there. The third thing is recycling, right? Whether it's leaves from your trees or kitchen waste from your kitchen, that does not belong in a landfill. That is soil. That belongs back in the earth. That is a perfect way to feed your own earth and grow your own food. So, just being aware of how much waste we generate when that, whether it is plastic, obviously we do want to eliminate plastic waste, but organic food waste and organic yard waste, how can we compost, recycle, and turn that back into soil? That's the third principle. And the fourth is water, right? Even in Long Island, we are sitting on aquifers that are very fragile. We are sitting on a Long Island Sound, which is a very important and fragile marine environment. So how do we respect the water systems, right? How do we use rain barrels, or how do we use smart irrigation? How do we make sure that we are not throwing pesticides into the bay? How do we make sure that we don't have algal blooms? How do we make sure that all the chemicals in our shampoo and pharmaceuticals don't end up in our aquifers, polluting them? So just respecting that, right? So the four principles being native plants, growing organic food, recycling and regenerating soil, And the fourth is respecting water and how do we treat that. So those are 4 things. If you just think about how you go about doing it, and think as an ethical being, there's a lot of scope for improvement. And then going beyond our own homes into our schoolyards and churchyards and golf courses and things like that. And then again, looking imaginatively with the eyes of a bumblebee or a bird and saying, hey, do I have habitat? Do I have food? Do I have nourishment? And finding little niches in which we can start growing things. That's extremely important. That's kind of sustainable landscaping, right? So that's, in a nutshell, what Rewild as an organization is about, and what we try to foster and grow and try to develop. So let me pause there. If you have any questions, of course, throw that into chat as we go along. And let me talk a little bit about myself and my journey. So when I talk about my journey, I really, I was struck by the Our Journeys theme. And I can talk about that in 3 ways, right? My personal journey, as Joan described, I was born in India, actually, in Coimbatore, not more than a couple of miles from where I'm sitting in Zoom here. It's southern India. I'm very close to, there are 11 biodiversity hotspots in the world. One of them just happens to be here in the mountains that abut Tamil Nadu and Kerala. There is a forest, there is a range of the Western Ghats, and it's incredibly diverse, harboring everything from large mammals like huge thousands of elephants to leopards to tigers to peacocks to many, many species of birds and butterflies. One of the things, right, in my personal journey, like when I reflect back and say, okay, look, what put me on the road to rewilding? One of the incidents from my childhood that really come into sharp focus for me is maybe, I was 7 years, 8 years old. My grandfather had a heart attack and he was recovering, and he was sitting in the kitchen. He was sitting in a corner on a chair, and my brother and myself, we were sitting there killing ants. And he had this moment of horror, a moment of empathy about, there was a look of horror in his eyes when he saw what we were doing. And that look of horror was not about, oh my God, you're doing something that is morally wrong, as much as a sense of personal pain that he felt when he saw us doing what we were doing. Right? So that moment sticks in my head. Another moment that very much sticks in my head is this whole, when I take car rides, right? Even now, I landed in a place called Cochin, which is on the other side of which is on the coast, on the other side of the hills that separate Coimbatore from the coast. And I took a 3-hour drive, and we came through, and we had a very clean windshield. Right? Which is kind of like a very strange thing. You're going through a region with potentially billions and billions of insects. So even many of us that can look back to our childhood and remember childhood journeys taken in, right before the storms or after the storms. We remember how many insects used to be in windshields. And now there's nothing, right? You drive for miles and you have a clean windshield, and we look at that as like, oh, wow, the roads have improved or whatever. But that's kind of like speaks to a horror. It's like if a Martian were to show up on the planet and think about all the missing billions, trillions of insects that are missing, the billions of birds that we have devastated. They say 5 billion birds are missing from the United States alone since the 1970s, right? So it's an apocalypse, it's a holocaust, it's a horror that we are visiting, not just on the environment but on ourselves. Right? So that just these small things give me a sense of the compassion and the connectedness we need to feel, and the horror that we need to feel at what we are doing on Earth. My personal journey, of course, I grew up in India. I came to the United States for graduate work at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Obviously, Madison, Wisconsin, as some of you or many of you or all of you know, is a hotbed of activism. So I was blessed to meet a lot of activists, I mean, both in India as well as in Madison, Wisconsin. The thing about Madison that really, I think, stood out for me in terms of my personal development was a lot of feminists. I had a lot of women friends. I really think, right, studying in tech fields in those days, and even now, I think to a large extent, right, math and tech was very much male-centric in India. The fact that there were a lot of smart women and smart women working in tech as well as working in other sciences, I really think that helped me grow and see things a little differently. And I've always been an organizer. Sonia, who's my wife, we met, right, organizing Youth Solidarity Summer, which was a camp for progressive South Asians. We met in Boston, but the camp was organized in New York, and we were activists together for a long time before we hooked up, so to speak. And again, right? I mean, the sense of that activism was, right, as immigrants, the stories that our young people were hearing about India was, oh, it's a land of spirituality and joy and music, and you take all the the values of the elite and basically claim ownership of that, and claim ownership of the beautiful dances and the beautiful cuisine. And really the immigrant youth, right, the second generation youth, were not hearing the stories of struggles of anti-caste movements, of communist movements, of land rights and peasant movements, of India's long thousands of years old tradition of atheism, of agnosticism, debate, of argument, of rejecting authority, right? So we thought, hey, that radical history, which is essential to progress, needs to be part of the story that we tell our youth when they claim their identity. The identity cannot just be claimed at just the elite. the identity of the elite cannot just become, the identity of the immigrant kids. And that's kind of like the thought process that has always driven us. And, more recently, right, Long Island Together is something that Sonia and I founded together in Port Washington around, in November of 2016, 2 days after that election. I don't know why, but basically we said, look, we need to, don't mourn, right, organize, right? That's kind of we said, look, let's go ahead and organize and start creating networks and start like getting ready for, we do see in this course of history, power never yields anything without a struggle. So we are in for more struggle, right? There's a lot of hope. And I always say this, right, about the current moment in terms of politics, which is, yes, it sucks to be a person of color now, but guess what? At least there's one political party that stands for an anti-racist message, and there is one political party where all the racists have flopped. This is such a great moment in history. People of color in this country have had to deal with 300 years where both political parties were dominated by racists. Sorry to say that. I mean, they destroyed Native Americans and they destroyed people of color. So we are in a good moment. This is what good looks like, right, in history. This is not what bad looks like. And there's a lot more struggle to get to till we get to a better state. But, we are in a good place, but that does not mean we have to stop struggling. And part of struggling is creating solidarity, creating networks, creating sort of taking ideas from each other and weaving them together. In a nutshell, I talk about my organizing as immigrant people and native plants. So the other part of my organizing is, of my personal journey, was a landscaping with native plants. And this is just me having this personal peeve that I had a lawn in the suburbs. Here I was fertilizing that lawn, watering that lawn, putting insecticide on that lawn, and then somebody came in and cut that lawn and threw it away. And next week I started all over again. It seemed so wasteful. I wasn't even allowed to have a cow or 2 goats or whatever it is that could eat that stuff. So I said, look, what can I do that's not a lawn that can actually, so to the person that is asking, right, that is to the person that is asking the question about what can we do about groundwater on the Long Island, get rid of lawns, because a big portion of your groundwater, all the phosphates and all the things that are, there are two issues, right? One is, of course, you want to replenish the aquifer with good groundwater. So what do you want? You want plants with deep roots that can, hold the water, slow the water, not let it rush off into the ocean, and just let it just soak. So you want rain gardens, you want plants that you need bioswales, you need all kinds of artifacts that will slow the water, run the water, hold the water, and plants that will use that water and clean that water, put it back into the aquifer. The second thing is you want plants where you don't have to give them pesticides, you don't have to give them insecticides. They're perfectly happy and healthy with minimal attention and maintenance on your part. You don't need, right? So if you look at that landscaping industry, what is that industry doing? It is McDonald's, right? It's basically, right, it's almost everybody's eating at McDonald's. It's a mass manufactured commodity, just like your French fries or your McChicken nuggets. You make lawn grass, you grow that in miles and miles somewhere. Then somebody brings that sod or seed, puts that on your lawn. Then they put manufactured chemicals, mostly fracked chemicals. Your urea is fracked. The guy that's driving so there's specialized industrial equipment that is no different from the fryer in McDonald's. And that industrial equipment is used to grow one monoculture. It's used to grow one crop very efficiently. It delivers lawn grass to you for a, I don't know, 1,000 square foot lawn at $50 a week, which is an incredible price. So that's kind of what that industry is meant to manufacture. It's meant to manufacture lawns, and it runs on immigrant labor. No surprise. I mean, workers that are no different from your McDonald's worker. Right? So it's an industrial landscape which is manufactured. Just because you look at that green and it looks green, it's not a ecosystem, right? It's a mass manufacture. You may as well put plastic out there, right? I mean, I don't feel that strongly about it, but still, right? It is a mass manufactured landscape, and you would like to get some diversity into it. So that's the first step, right? And the lawn grass, when you look at it, its roots, because we keep cutting it on top, the roots are like 4 inches, which means it dries out every 3 days, which means you have to water it every 3 days, right? And you're cutting the nitrogen. The green in that lawn grass is its chlorophyll, which has its nitrogen in it, and you cut it and throw it away, then obviously you have to replenish that nitrogen, which means you need urea or some other fertilizer coming in. On the other hand, if you are using native plants, which evolved here and go for free here, and have deep roots and can be drought tolerant and don't need those fertilizers because, thank you, they have co-evolved with all the insects. They're not going to be eaten by anything, right? And they are perfectly okay. You don't need to fertilize them. You don't need to spray them with insecticide. So it's really thinking about our landscapes in that way. This is how we get the water, as well as you can cut those plants once a year and then put them in an open pile compost. That's how you make compost. You don't even need a composter. If you need a composter, we can talk about the types of composter, but the simplest composter is a big pile. Just put a little open pile, like three. I mean, I'll hold up a picture or something like that later in this thing, but it's a fairly simple. Just use a pile. You can get it hot compost, get a pitchfork, and just turn it around. Usually we all have enough room. We always have like that forgotten corner behind the tree on the side where nothing grows. Fantastic. Just put your compost there, and then you can just bury your kitchen scraps underneath and no rodents will get to it if you bury it deep enough. Or you could use the composters that you could use, any composter, including the one that the town of North Hempstead gives you. Put your kitchen scraps in there, let them sit there for a while till the rodents don't get to them, and then you can move them in there. So there's many techniques we can talk about, but basically, right, keeping your food scraps and your yard waste as treating that as gold for your yard and not necessarily as something, so if you did that, then you don't need the urea because you're producing your own fertilizer. So that's kind of the thought process that I came into rewilding with, and that's it over the last, and it's not like I knew this 20 years ago, right? It's in the last 4 years that, again, talking to people, interacting, reading, I've really developed a sense of how much we can do in terms of creating sustainable landscapes. So that's kind of like my personal journey, right? Starting from a childhood where I was very much, at least in my family and community, we're largely vegetarian. Like, there was definitely a lot of respect for not just human beings, but just feeling that, everything has life and it is connected. Right? So that's one part of my journey. The second part of my journey, if I were to say part 2 of my journey, it's the journey of intellect and spirit. And there I would say, like, it's the movements, it's the great big enlightenment movements that we have seen, especially in India. I feel like so blessed to be at the confluence of many different enlightenment movements. starting from, right? I mean, starting from our traditions of animism, with that indigenous people in, India is very unique in the fact that many of those indigenous traditions are still alive. They've not been wiped out by, any dominant religion. There are still people who worship specific, right, trees and practice. They have a sense of both spiritual and medicinal connection to the environment around them, and that animism, in some sense, animates a lot of my belief. Then you have the great religions like Hinduism, right? Buddhism, which is again a reaction against the caste dominated Hindu society. There's Jainism, which is a religion that I don't know if many of you have heard of, but obviously I think of that as the religion of the future. It's a religion of nonviolence and utmost respect for all beings. Uh, it's just a remarkable religion, and I would encourage those of you who don't know it to research it on your own. It's called Jainism. It's a great tradition again, especially in the part of India that I am. The Jains were very dominant as a anti-caste movement for many millennia. And then you have, Christianity came to India, and there are still Jews in Cochin where I landed, right? So Jewish communities have been practicing their faith in this land. Christianity came to this land before it reached anywhere in Europe, because it came with Saint Thomas. Islam came to this land, and Islamic empires again, in the sense of, right, bringing with them a sense of justice, a sense of equality. So when everything reacts here against, right, caste Hinduism, which believes in hierarchies of birth, and you have many movements which address different aspects of equality, of fraternity, of connectedness, of spirituality in India. And then I don't want to forget the Western Enlightenment. I mean, with the Portuguese and the British and the Dutch, especially with the English, we got, right. We knew about Marx and Hegel and Voltaire and all the Enlightenment radicals, and the Indian nationalist movement with Gandhi or Nehru. Gandhi especially fuses a lot of these traditions, takes things from Islam, takes things from Christianity, takes things from Hinduism, combines that with a strong humanist ethic that comes out of the Western tradition, right? And so that I see the yin and the yang at play in my intellectual history, right? Here is one is a tradition which I see in Buddhism and Jainism and Hinduism of believing in rebirth, and of a human species that is not separate from the rest of creation. Human beings are not spiritually better or worse. They may have language, and they may have cognition. They may be, whatever, different in certain respects, but a human being has no more right than a blade of grass or an insect or a cockroach or other thing, because in your next life you could be one of those and you're not any different, right? So when you have a philosophy that comes out of karma and rebirth, your sense of connectedness and your sense of superiority does not, that does not exist. On the other hand, the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition and the humanist tradition, right, with its emphasis on the human being above and different from creation, but equality among human beings, not of caste and differentiation, but the rights of man, the right that everybody is equal in the eyes of God, or in the eyes of law, or the eyes of the law, or needs to be equal as a member of society, needs to have equal opportunity. So both of these are important traditions that interplay in India and have interplayed in my life. So when I talk about my journey in that sense, right, it's obviously there. And then there's the journey of life itself, life on this planet itself, and evolution, and human beings and me are just a tiny little part of it. And that's the other way that we need to think about our lives, right? What are we doing? We've decimated so much biodiversity that took millennia and whatever, millions and millions of years to evolve, right? So what are we doing, and how can we restore that? We call this the age of the Anthropocene, and we talk about the extinctions that we are causing, right, left, and not even talk about the marine environment, which is being devastated, land and the insect population and birds, and we talk about there's no species other than us that seems to be thriving on the planet right now. And that's, again, right, coming a full cycle, right? It's really, so when you look at my, it comes a full cycle to where what my grandfather said on the kitchen floor, which is that you need to feel a sense of horror when any other insect or being is destroyed. And we need to stop, looking at them as living things. They're not living things, they're living beings, and the perspective of them as living, interconnected living beings. A flower always implies a pollinator. Plant does not flower because it likes to flower. Flower is a costly affair for a plant, and it's putting a nectar into it, and it's putting pollen into it, right? So it does it for a reason, and that's in order to have, transfer pollen from a anther to a stigma. And it's doing it in a very, very evolutionarily unique way. It's soliciting a completely different species. In order for a plant to have sex with another plant of its own species, it's calling on an insect as an intermediary, typically an insect as an intermediary between that relationship. It's a very modern evolutionary, in the Jurassic, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, there were no flowering plants, or there were very few flowering plants. Flowering plants have evolved in a very successful way together with their pollinators in the last few 100 million years. So when we tell the story of life, we start seeing these as not immutable natural things that existed forever, but things that we could change and destroy in our lifetimes or in the lifetimes of our children. So again, coming back to that sense of horror and connectedness, I think that is very important. And what do you do about it? Well, go to rewildlongisland.org, register. There's a lot of stories there, and I'm not saying we are the only organization doing it. We have a lot of links to resources. Doug Tallamy is one of our modern prophets. If you haven't heard him, I'll just put his name in the chat. Look up his videos, talk, listen to ideas of rewilding, and you'll see how, not just how important it is to do it, but also how impactful you can do this in very, very small spaces, and actually see visible impact, gain hope, put your hands in the earth and gain hope, right? So that's kind of like my, the compressed version of my message. And if you go to our website, there are two things that are coming up. One is we have a call for volunteers on March 14th. We will be talking about all kinds of volunteer opportunities coming up. We'll have a native plant sale right before Mother's Day. So if you want to buy native plants and put them in, we try to make it easy and affordable and doable. And then we have a summer program to fight hunger and climate change, where we'll be recruiting high school youth in order to grow native plants, grow food for our vulnerable, as well as remove invasive from preserves and things like that. We want our youth not just to have climate anxiety, but to have climate hope and to know that they can affect change just like we can. So,
Raju, as someone who lives in an apartment building, how can I address any of what you're saying? I live in an apartment building.
Okay, so your apartment building has a communal landscaping space, correct? You are not, so first, no communal landscaping space, it's all concrete? Okay, good. If it is all concrete and it's a communal landscaping space, there is a way of getting containers and container gardens in there. Or there are local churchyards, there are local schoolyards, there's a local median. Your town, there may be a local preserve. And if you tell me which town you live in, I can even point to
He lives right near the Ethical Humanist Society. You can garden there, Joan.
Okay. And the other place that I would say is the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Shelter Rock. They have a 100-acre preserve. They are desperately looking for volunteers to help them fight invasives, remove invasives, put native plants in. So absolutely, that's another place you can go to. So there's a lot of community organizations that could use your help.
Okay, Raju. Mel, maybe we can add some music to this. Raju, we'll have a Q&A after we finish up our meeting.